I had to give an artist talk in Camden, and I hadn't really given one, and so I came up with 5 slides, and I'm going to basically tell you guys about them. The first thing you should know is that I came out as an artist just 2 years ago. It's not that I hadn't been making art, but I kind of disappeared from the planet. And so 2 years ago, I quit my job. A year and a half ago, I posted my first artwork on Facebook. People didn't even know I was an artist. I had been an art teacher, but then I got cut and had to teach history and geography as well as science for 12 years, so people just had no idea. And then I posted my first work a year and a half ago on Facebook. People were positive. A year ago, I figured out Instagram, I think. And that went really well, and then I found out that that's where most artists share their stuff. And so I started doing that. And so I'm very, very new at this. So we'll just start from the beginning. I did not grow up wanting to be an artist, even though all I did was draw. I was an odd kid. I wanted to be a natural world explorer, and in order to do that in the wetlands of Wisconsin, I needed snowshoes. And so I took wire coat hangers and made them into circles, and using my mom's sewing machine, cut strips of turquoise Navajo together and wove them into snowshoes. And now I realize that that was my first sculpture, because I'm not very practical, and I didn't become a tracker, even though I did go out with my snowshoes and sketch things that I was seeing. Really, the snowshoes were kind of a dream, you know? They were a longing, they were an aspiration. And then the next glimmer I got was, at 13, I read a sci-fi book that talked about a future job being a synthesist, where you would take all the things, all the knowledge of the world and synthesize it for humanity. And I was like, wow, I want to know about everything, you know, and so I want to be that. And really that's what an artist is, isn't it? So my parents, art was not a thing. The light here's poor, I'm sorry. My parents didn't know what art was. I lived in northern Wisconsin. You know, they knew what snowmobiles were. And, they never took me to any art galleries or anything like that. And they didn't value it, really. And they thought it was just something that maybe I should just get over. So I went and decided to go to school for animal and veterinary science. And I did that after hitchhiking up to Alaska and living and working for a few years and meeting my husband and meeting a native woman who was a veterinarian who stood on a stump and told me about early embryology, and I was totally hooked, because from the beginning I wasn't someone that loved nature. You know, I'm not a nature lover. I lived in nature, and I wanted to understand it. Not on a superficial optical level, but I wanted to understand what made it tick. I wanted to get closer and more intimate with it. And for that, I knew I needed to study more. And for example, taking biochemistry, I met God. I didn't have one before that, but biochemistry explained like the key to everything that was happening in nature. And now when I look at the natural world, I'm constantly thinking on a cellular, an atomic, a physical level. And so I can't just look at the optics of it. So animal and veterinary science degrees don't allow you hardly any electives. And you have to take a lot of credits, and you don't have any choices. You only have like 3 classes that you can take as electives. And because the other classes were really hard, I took art classes. And this was one of the first drawings I made, and I was working in a vet hospital while I was studying, and looking at the microscope a lot and learning about microscopic views of the world. And so I really apologize for the quality of the image here, but this big sweep is like a big sweep of geological land. It's like a tectonic force subducting at the edge of the ocean, but it's also the intestinal villi that I was looking at under the microscope. But the big sweep of evolution is what was so fascinating to me. And so as I made this big sweep, I decided to incorporate these pillars. In some of these drawings that I did, they're vertical. And I call them pillars, but they're rectangular, semi-transparent areas, and they're filled with text from my textbooks, because I was learning the secrets of the universe. And so these pillars were like the canon of science. And so by putting the pillars in there, that was kind of like a structural support for what I was now understanding.
What was the medium you were using?
Charcoal.
Oh, charcoal?
Charcoal pencil.
What's the size of that?
And then, because of what I was learning about genetics and evolution, which became my special field, I've always been fascinated by movement through big time, like evolutionary time, as well as migration through space. And so you can't really see it, but there are migrating elk in there. And the migration of the animals at a smaller scale with the microvilli at a larger scale, to me, played a trick on my mind where I could experience both simultaneously and feel like a big sweep of time and a big sweep of space and a big sweep of knowledge that I was tapping into. And I like those drawings. So that was in drawing one. And, but I still had more other studying to do. And so later, I continued loving drawing. I've taken it off all my website, because when I started this 2 years ago, I got a lot of bad advice, including, if you want to be an artist, you have to be consistent, so get all that other stuff off your website. So I had just made my website for the first time, and I have closets of portfolios full of work. I don't know how big these things are. I had to get them all out of the bed and measure them. And then with one click, I disappeared it all, but I'm going to put it back, because it really pisses me off that anybody would tell me that that is a good idea. What if we come to? So I still like to draw. And this drawing, I love survivor species, like ancient species, you know, turtles, things that evolved millions of years prior to us and still persist, as well as highly textured things. I like highly textured things. And so this drawing is a full sheet of watercolor paper. It's 22 by 30, and it's charcoal, and it's a snapping turtle. And the sailing ship, which has been a symbol for me for a long time, is perched on its back, sailing into big time, like sailing into the future. And the radiating, buoyant, rhythmic background kind of contributes to that. So that's a very big drawing. And I was trying to figure out, how am I ever going to show these? I can't afford to frame them. So I figured out how to mount them to a panel and then make a cradle and a frame in my backyard next to the half-heart trap and the woodshed, which Peter has seen on a resin table. And then how to use spray varnish so that you're not having to add any expensive or heavy glass or whatnot. But I found throughout all my art making, there have always been two forces in opposition, and I always called them the Apollonian and the Dionysian, because I love mythology. The forces of order, or minimalism, and the forces of expansive proliferation. I think in my last talk I called it chaos, and someone objected, but I'm not talking about chaos. I'm talking about, like, if you look at an overgrown field full of wild grasses and weeds. The amount of proliferation of life in there, as I used to tell my students, is extraordinary compared to like a completely sterile school lawn. So I would take kids out and show them and teach them that. So some of my work is really minimalist, very Apollonian, very ordered, very much about how to put nature in an understandable package. But some of my work is not. And I guess we'll probably see more examples of that. And I don't even have any examples here of the wilder, more expressionistic stuff. In fact, nobody's ever seen it. I have hundreds of works that no one's ever seen over the last 25 years.
That's a pretty amazing composition if you were just starting out at that time.
That's what I didn't know that. I know that now. It's like one of the insults my mom used to have for me is, Kelly, you're such a smart aleck. So I didn't really know. I just knew that I really loved making them. I made about 6 drawings like this. And I'm still studying animal and veterinary science. I still don't think being an artist is something that I could do and make money and live. And so I'm skipping around a lot, but I did a really quick, intuitive left turn, or I should say right turn. I graduated, and I never thought of changing my major because I was on full scholarship, room and board, the whole thing. And the scholarship people thought I was going to go into the Peace Corps and save the world, feed everyone. And so there was a heavy pressure not to do this. And so when I graduated, I interviewed and got a job with a biotech place down in Westbrook that basically they raise goats and they use their blood to create insulin, antibodies, etc. And then they milk the goat's blood through a machine, extract the medicine, and someone had to take care of the goats and do all that. And that was a really exciting job, and I should have been really proud of myself. And I paid for school, my husband and I paid for school by living in a van the entire time we went to school, undergraduate. We lived in the steam plant parking lot of UMO. And our first 2 years were in a tent in Alaska. And then our next 3 years together were living in a van. And van life was not a thing then. And we had a van. And then eventually it got holes in it so mosquitoes could get in, and then we got another van. And then we got a Pinto for running around, so they had been named the Santa Maria, the Nina, the food van, and the Pinto. And then in winter I'd rent a room in some shared house. And we were raking berries to make money to pay off the last year of school. And I saw a little ad about that big in the newspaper, this was pre-internet, for art teaching at Sedemoksham Middle School in Dover, Foxcroft. Now, I had no background in teaching. None. And I didn't even think I liked kids. I had never changed a diaper until I had my own child at almost 40 years old. I didn't understand little kids, and everyone was scared of middle schoolers. I don't know why I did this, and I interviewed, and they hired me because they couldn't get anyone else. In the 80s, you could make more money waitressing. It's true. It's still true.
I was going to say, it's still true.
And I didn't, so I met these people, and I thought they were the most fascinating creatures I had ever met. They were middle schoolers, and they liked me. I could be as eccentric as possible, and they were totally honest. Kids are really honest. I just liked them so much that I decided to quit my job and go back to school and become qualified, because I felt like teachers should be qualified. So I went back to school to get another degree in studio art, but I didn't want to dilute it because I felt like I'd done so much messing around with animal science and other humanities, and so I didn't take art education. I never did, at all. And I took studio art, became a printmaker. And so this was my first painting class. That was my first oil painting. And you can't see it well, but the texture is incredible. It sticks out like a 1/4 inch. I had inherited some lead white from some old lady and had really like thick textural paint. I love that lead white. And wrote a poem that went with this from a turtle's point of view, looking up at the light in a radiant universe. And then I would get hooked on certain printmaking things. Then I took intaglio, and I really liked that. Something about the layering and the analysis of the layering along with chance effects. And I go on these tangents like I decided one summer to bike the coast of Maine alone while reading the Russian authors. I read all that stuff. So this time I was reading these accounts of British colonial safari dudes doing their big game hunting in Africa. And in the text it was talking about stuff like orange marmalade and gin and tonics and having the black people set up your tent. And it was gross and fascinating at the same time. This really bizarre culture. And there was something about the creatures that were now, I knew that the black rhino was endangered, and I wanted to put that together. So this is a full color print called Black Rhino of Savo, and then I would make a ghost print, which you probably all know what that is, right? You run the playthrough again, you get and then I took the text of these books that I was reading with a fountain pen and walnut ink, and I wrote the text over the ghost. And these are, in real life, extremely colorful and have a lot of texture, but it's not really visible here. And I did that with bears and caribou and all kinds of different animals. And that was fun. And so then I got an undergraduate degree. So towards the end of my undergraduate degree, I decided to carve stone. And these are 2 sculptures that I carved in stone that are about 200 pounds each, with shaped plexi pieces that fit into drilled holes. And they were really hard to work on because you have to use a pneumatic drill. It's really dusty, it's really unhealthy. Good thing I didn't have kids, couldn't have done it. And in fact, we lived in a basement, and I had a 50-gallon drum that I would set these stones on, and one fell off and broke the floor. And we found out that the floor was just hemlock. It was dirt under there, and it was all mold. So Ron and I had to go live in a tent together. And we had to take our chainsaw and saw up our house, throw it all outside. I have pictures, it's unbelievable. Pour cement through the Anderson window of the basement, rebuild the whole house. So, but this one, for example, is called Cetacean, and I touched a whale once in Alaska. When we worked up there, we did soil mapping, we did grunt work, we built trails, we built log buildings, we did finning, which means you take a chainsaw and you cut everything down, except for one tree every 16 feet. We cleared streams, and we worked with wildlife researchers. We rebuilt the CCC trail across Admiralty Island in the Tongass, and then bear researchers, that's where the highest percentage of bears are other than Kodiak Island. We did work with these researchers, but we were like the grunts, And so I went out with a whale researcher, and a whale came up, and I was able to lean out of the Zodiac and touch it. And the surface of the polished soapstone is very like the cool, firm surface of the whale. And this one is more avian, obviously. And then I did a few mammalian ones, and these are currently buried behind my house. I've managed to trek them all over from state to state. Most of my work's been destroyed by that, but they're out there somewhere. And then I ran out of money, so I worked in a veterinary hospital for a few years as a surgical technician, and that was interesting. And we would get in a lot of birds, because the VZ vet that I worked for then, Karen Miles, she specialized in birds, wildlife, and exotic birds. And I had worked for the Eagle Project while I was an animal and veterinary science student. Remember when eagles were really, really in danger?
Yeah.
Well, my husband and I were hired to pick up dead chickens all over Waldo County. We went to all these chicken barns, and they'd have dead chickens in this little side building that they were gonna like burn up, and we'd take them and throw them in the back of the truck. And we'd also go to this trapper place where trappers take their skins in Holden, and they would take the skins off, and then they would take the skinned bodies and put them in barrels in the back. And we had to go with like a rubber glove and take this, it's like a pile of goo in there, grab the bone and throw this bloody stuff on the truck. And I mean, and then we had to go out in the school forest and use an axe to chop all the heads off, because that's where the lead shot was. And by then the animals were like contorted in rigor mortis with their teeth like, and then we had to take those frozen animals and go take them up to Cobscook to a feeding center. And out on the ice, we would take them out by sled before sunlight, and then we would creep into this white painted cardboard box and use a Questar telescope to read all the birds of all the eagles that came in, and other birds and other animals, and we read the numbers. We got to know all these eagles, like 50 at a time, plus, you know, foxes and lynxes. It was really cool and really cold. And so these animal things are interwoven. You know, I did a painting, a drawing once of a raven eating one of the white chickens, and it was simultaneously exactly literally what I was seeing, but it also, people thought it was a rape scene. It had this yin-yang thing going on with the black and white. And so I earned some money and applied to grad school, and during that time, by the way, I was an art fellow. For 2 years, I was an art fellow back in the 80s, and that was very important to me. That was when the Frick Gallery and Gallery 68 were going on, and oh my gosh, Rosemary Frick wanted to buy this one. And, but then she didn't. It's pretty big. And I thought maybe I could be an artist. And that's what got me to go to grad school, was art fellows, even though I was there only briefly. But I did have a big one-person show at Art Fellows. And remember when we had newspapers that wrote up stuff like that? There were like art critic people that talked about it. It was very exciting. And 2 papers. So I took my pneumatic drill to grad school, and I made these boats. And they're marble boats, and they're about this long, this high, this wide. Marble is really hard to carve. And while carving it, I accidentally broke a piece off and had to use epoxy and marble dust to put it back together. But I left the seam, because these were going to be my magnum opus, and I was going to give them to my parents. So I presented them to my parents. 2 people, one slightly damaged. Really damaged. 2 people, one slightly damaged, moving through their lives together. And they didn't have room for it. They gave it back. So I just put it in the Passages show down at River Arts, just because when am I ever going to show that, you know? And so this passage of big time has always been really important. But I hated grad school. The people were really competitive, really egotistical. They weren't nice. And I thought, Christ, here I am in grad school, I'm supposed to be having this community of support and like make friends and stuff. And it wasn't like that. It was competitive. And I just don't belong in that kind of world. I belong in super rural, if not wilderness places with very few people that cause you to really appreciate everyone that comes across you. And I'm a Midwesterner, so I'm like friendly to all, instant friends with everyone. I'm guileless, I am, it's amazing that I'm alive. Again, it happened with the animal and vet, it happened with the undergraduate degree, and again, it happened in grad school that I got another full scholarship. And they said, Kelly, just go in your studio and do what you do. Because I would come up with like 50 artworks a month. I'm ridiculously prolific. I don't want to do anything else. And so I made these small clay boats. Some are like 4 inches long. They stuck me in the clay studio because they didn't have any room in the sculpture studio. Well, where I went to school at UMO, they didn't have clay. I never studied watercolor. I never studied clay and ceramics. And so I was kind of like beginner's mind in the clay room. And there were all these people there that knew a lot of technical things. And I didn't know any technical things. So I made forms out of white earthenware and fired them as bisque and did not glaze them. I learned to stain them with Kool-Aid and fabric stain and tea, my ever-present tea. And I made a whole series of sculptures like that. And then I didn't want to I called them the fleet. I made 4,000 of these small clay boats. And it was because I was clinically depressed. But I was living on the Mississippi about 200 miles away from the campus at Madison, Wisconsin. And I was really depressed. So I made these 4,000 boats and they kept me alive. And then they wanted me to use the gallery at University of Maine, University of Wisconsin, Madison. And it just didn't feel right. And I didn't want them there. So I decided to take a road trip. And I took my fleet to 4 different states. And I would set them up, no advance warning, no press, nothing. I would show up and I would set them up in front of a factory. I set them up over the effigy mounds along the Mississippi. I set them up on top of Mount Katahdin. I set them up in the North Woods and pine plantations. I went to a cave in Minnesota and put them at the bottom of a cave. I put them everywhere, and they embodied me somehow. And this is a fleet of them underneath a flowering crab, and they look exactly like petals, and they're clay boats. And as I did this, I kept a journal that I will never share with anyone, because all these average people that didn't know anything about art and never had been to a gallery would come up and they would tell me about their lives. I mean, people would come up to me in parks and weird places and say, they'd tell me about their grief, about their loss, about everything. One guy thought he was Elvis. I put him in urban situations too. Like, I did him right on this park by where all these punk kids, this was like early 90s, these punk homeless kids hung out. Doing drugs, starting stuff on fire, smoking cigarettes, stuff like that. So I set it up right in the middle of Madison. No, that was Chicago. And these punk kids were curious, right? And at first they were like dissing it, and one kid took a piece of paper and just crumpled it up and threw it in the middle of the fleet. Well, it turned out to be a piece of porn. So I engaged the kid. And by the end of the story, not only had he decided to take off his shirt with his spike collar still on and lay down in a crucifix pose on top of the fleet, which of course risked his skin as well as my fleet, and he laid down in a crucifix pose and I got a picture. I'm not a photographer, but I got a picture. And then he said, let's start him on fire. And we took the porn and we stuck it like kindling by a small fleet, and we lit it on fire, and we put some pieces inside some of the boats and let them have them light on fire. Really, exactly what my MFA exhibition was meant to be. And so then I came back to Maine, and I had to make a living. And so I took the tests required to become a teacher. And because I had taught at Southern Mocha, I waived student teaching, so I was able to eliminate all the crap you have to go through to be a teacher. Now, I'm not saying this is a good thing. You know, I'm a science teacher too, but I had a degree in science. In fact, when I taught at Mount View Middle School, I was the only teacher of science at that middle school that had an actual degree in science. I definitely believe people should be qualified. And I would never have continued teaching art unless I felt I was. But I became a teacher. And I taught in 4 different districts after that, and I ended up in the worst paying, worst work conditions, worst physical plant, and most impoverished school in the area. Mount View was just a disaster at the time. We didn't have the new building. It was like the Indian reservation. It was like these trailers. I would duct tape. I taught art in one, and I had the kids bring 5-gallon buckets of water across this ice skating rink of ice. A teacher broke their ankle on the steps. Squirrels had eaten the wiring, so the lights kept going out. No phone, no bathroom in case of an emergency with the phone especially. And I had to duct tape the exterior doors with masking tape to keep the snow from blowing in. A little drift would form in the corner of my room. Nobody wanted to sit in that corner. So I fell in love with the kids, and I really did devote myself to them. And I also had decided to have a kid myself when I came back from grad school. And I kept making artwork of both the minimalist Apollonian variety, but also the maximalist Dionysian celebration, but I couldn't tell anybody about it because, now this is gonna wreck my talk here now, but when I had the baby at EMMC, the baby was abducted within hours of birth after a very rough birth. This was 26 years ago. This is my daughter. And they got him back within 24 hours, but my wiring changed. I've always been an anxious, high-strung person, but I remember saying, those of you that have given birth, I remember saying, now I'm almost 40 years old. I'm saying, I was pregnant. I did have a baby, didn't I? And then I was looking out at BMHI from the window of EMMC, and I had worked as a psych tech. I knew what was possible. And I remember having a conversation, even though biochemistry was my God, I decided, well, maybe there is a God or a devil. And I talked to both of them. And I said, I will totally give up any ambition I have, any personal desires, bring him back. And they did. The cops did. They had set up mats, they had closed off the border, you could leave or enter the state. It was really quite the deal. It was in the Boston Globe. Then they sequestered us for 2 weeks, told us they'd write a statement for us. I said, fine. Then 2 weeks later, they shuffled us out in the middle of darkness out the basement door and told us to go home and change our phone number. And then Montel Williams was calling, wanted us to be on TV. And we had to change our number, and we weren't supposed to tell anyone. And then the lady went to jail, and I had a victim's advocate help me through that. And then she got out of jail and moved 8 miles away from where we lived. And so I kind of just went underground. And obviously, as the kids got older and knew who they were and everything, I felt like I could tell people. It wasn't a big secret, but I've just kind of gotten used to just doing my teaching thing and my art on my own, just hiding. And so these are some early Apollonian watercolors. But these are the ones that are in this show that I did recently in 2022. And these are watercolors. They're not collage. They look collage-y, David, they do. But it's all watercolor and gouache. And to me, the reason why there's all this detail, it's not Aboriginal dot making, it's bandolier bags. In grad school, I did a paper about bandolier bags, and I grew up in northern Wisconsin where Ojibwe culture was all over the place. And the beadwork was important to me. And so I like looking at these with the incredible complexity, and to me, this little area could be a galaxy, or it could be the interior of a cell, you know? And I thought, well, I could just, and a sturgeon is a survivor species, and I thought, well, I could just like live in these worlds for the rest of my life and be totally happy. But I gotta make some money. And so if I put them into a composition that is attractive to others, maybe I could sell some. And I did quit my job early, so I do need money. And so this is clearly both are fairly northern wilderness landscapes, don't have humans in them. I lived in Alaska for a number of years. You all know what it's like to look up at the night sky in a truly dark sky, wilderness universe, and not be the top predator on the planet and feel your own minuscule lack of importance. And so these are the ones that I mounted. And now I'm making these. Now I also segued into like plein air painting. For a while I thought I'm going to be a plein air painter, and people will buy those. And so I watched all the Eric Rhodes videos during the pandemic, and so I tried different things. I'm always trying different things. But now I'm making these collage-based paintings where I use my own original prints and stamps to do a lot of printmaking in my basement, and use different weights of papers that wrinkle in various ways that I can control based on what kind of paper I use. And then I can layer them on a panel and then sand them and then paint them and then layer some more and then sand it and paint it. And like 50 layers later, I reach a point of finishedness. And what I like about that is that these, like these, they're patterns upon patterns for me has become a proxy for those layers of relationship in nature. I think when people say they love nature, sometimes they don't know about tooth and claw. You know, they don't know about the eagle pecking the guts out of the chicken. They don't know about, you know, real wildlife. It stinks. They eat each other, you know. It's not cute. It's real. And all those layers of reality, for me, have become translated into layers of pattern. So even though you cannot see it here, there are multiple translucent and transparent layers of paper that you can see underneath. And there's a highly textured surface that gets sanded down but remains highly textured. And again, my love of all this detail, I figured, well, I'll put it into an attractive composition and try to get people to buy it. And in my 2 years that I described of coming out as an artist, shortly after I discovered Instagram, about a year ago, last winter, I didn't know this would happen, but a gallery called me up. It was a Arundel Farm Gallery in Kennebunk, and they wanted me to be their featured artist. And I didn't know that this could happen. I thought at least 5 years would go by before you'd get a gallery interested. So I did that, but I actually sold more work on my own, and I'm very conflicted. I don't know how I feel about the gallery model. I like with my fleet, when I got to talk to real people, that way my art connected me to real people. So believe it or not, I just bought one of those tents, those booths, and I'm going to do the art fair thing. And see, see if I can, because some of my best work got sold to people and I don't even know who they are, because the gallery keeps a hold of all that. I don't even have their address. I might like it more. We'll see. But that's my plan, and if I can do that for 3 years, I could pay for my health insurance until I'm 65. And so that is the end of my talk. Any questions?